World Horse Welfare Wednesday webinar of 2025. You're joining us by Zoom and by YouTube. However you're joining us, you're very welcome. And I'm delighted to welcome Ruth Dancer and Jenny Fernando to talk to us about environmental sustainability and how we can make our horses and have the impact of our horses far more positive than negative. And I know we're going to have lots of practical ideas about how we can achieve that. Now, if you've joined us before, you'll absolutely know the format. All of our webinars are on our YouTube education channel, and you can register for and sign up to our YouTube education channel at any time if you haven't already done so. And we'll put the link for doing that in the chat. Now, the format for this evening's webinar is going to be a half an hour presentation, followed by a structured Q&A, and of course then the third part of the evening or the session is very much over to you, where you give us our questions. And as you know, we have been doing our webinars for since 2020 now, and we try and cover a wide range of topics. And if you've got any topics that you would like us to cover in a future webinar, then please do email us at education@worldhorsewelfare.org. Once we get into this evening, very much over to you. If you're joining us by YouTube, you can put questions in the comments section. And if you're joining us by Zoom, by all means use the chat function to chat amongst yourselves, but please try and remember to put all the questions that you have for our two panelists, for Jenny and for the Ruth, in the Q&A function. Much easier for me to manage, and you can also then upvote questions that you really like. So them's the rules of the game. Hopefully you all know those. But I am really delighted to introduce Ruth and Jenny to you this evening. Now I have to share my screen, and it's been a long time since I've done that. So there we go, share. Hopefully, now you can see sustainable equestrianism, making the management of our horses more environmentally friendly. A fascinating topic and a really important topic. And just to sort of get us going, we've got a poll question for you, which if you're on YouTube, you can just put the answer into the comments function. But if you're on Zoom, so much better, you'll be able to answer the poll. Do you consider environmental sustainability in the management of your yard? And there we've just put yes, no, or I'm not sure. So whilst you're going to consider that question, which I know that the team will find helpful, especially when we get into the Q&A, I'm delighted to introduce to you Ruth Dancer, who I first met 3 years ago. She came into the horse world, through the horse racing world, where she did an initial piece of work for a Thoroughbred Breeders Association and the British Horse Racing Authority, and then has done, I don't think there's many parts of the equestrian world that Ruth now hasn't advised and supported in providing advice and guidance and practical guidance on that, on how we can improve our environmental sustainability in different areas of the equine sector. And I know, speaking from a World Horse Welfare perspective, we have been hugely grateful to Ruth for all the support she's given us. And some of you might recognise her because she spoke at our annual conference in November, back in November 2023, when our focus was very much on the environment. And of course, being a bit of a sports nut, I was always very interested to know that by background, she was a chartered environmentalist and was involved in the London 2012 Olympics and Paralympics and the England 2015 Rugby World Cup. England did somewhat better, or Great Britain did somewhat better in the Olympics than we did in the World Cup. But we'll move on from that. Anyway, before I hand over, no, a quirky fact about Ruth, I nearly forgot. I love this. Both our panelists this evening have given us a quirky fact from their younger years, which I absolutely love. And Ruth's foray into environmentalism was at a very early age. And at the age of 11, she created a storyboard for a morph cartoon, which she created with Peter Lord at Aardman Animations. And it was a comedy sketch about recycling. And Ruth's not sure any of the clips still exist. It slightly ages her though, because she still does have the VHS video of it. And if we're good, we might be able to see that later on. Anyway, before I hand over to Ruth, Basil, can you give us the answer to the poll please. Oh my word, that has surprised me, and it's and hopefully a very good answer. Over 3/4 of you do consider the environmental sustainability in the management of your yard. So hopefully by the end of this, we'll get that over 90%. So Ruth, there's your challenge, 70, 70, 90%. You've got about 13% to go on that, and you've got 30 minutes in which to do so. Over to you, Ruth.
Oh, goodness me. Well, like you, I have the total fear and panic of technology and sharing screens. So I'm hoping that Basil will holler if anything goes wrong at this stage.
No, that's dead on. You're good.
I'm all good. That's fabulous. That's great to know. Well, thank you so much for having me, Rolly. It's an absolute delight to start the year in this way. And it's a pleasure to share the next hour with you and talk about a topic that I personally feel inspired by every day and have done for many, many years, since I was at least 11. And I think that most people on the call are here because you're a horse owner or a livery yard owner or maybe a leisure rider, certainly 77% if you think about the environment. So clearly that's a motivator. And so I'm going to talk about how we can run our businesses and care for our horses in a way that really complements the environment. We live in a time when the topic of environmental sustainability can be quite polarizing, confusing, certainly overwhelming. I think overwhelm is probably the word that comes up on a daily basis. And it really doesn't need to be. Quite often the answers we already know, they're very simple. The actions are simple, the changes are achievable. We just have to decide to act and make the change and have confidence in that. So for the next 30 minutes that I have before the Q&A, I'm going to focus on 4 main areas. What does it really mean to be environmentally friendly, which is the title of today? And then we're going to consider the relationship between sustainability and horse welfare. This is, after all, Welfare Wednesday. And then I'll take you through, spend the bulk of the time on some tips and some tools to create environmentally friendly yards. And then finally, we're just going to have a little moment at the end to think more generally about what it's like now here in 2025 to talk about this topic, because this is not a new topic. Scientists have been talking about this for since the 1800s, but 2025 is a very unique year, and we're going to cover that off. So what does it really mean to be environmentally friendly? Well, you could ask this question to 1,000 different people and get 1,000 different responses. And a lot of that is down to both confusion, maybe regarding the topic itself, but also the importance that different people place on different topics. Ultimately, being environmentally friendly comes down to not taking the environment for granted and recognizing that the land, water, and air are fundamental building blocks of life. We can't survive without them. It seems obvious, but actually, we really do take it for granted, and we haven't done a very good job of taking care of them over the last century. So for many, if you ask them the question, being environmentally friendly is about a carbon footprint, maybe, and thinking about climate change. People understand that the burning of fossil fuels and destruction of the things that absorb carbon dioxide, in other words, trees, our oceans, peatlands, etc., has caused rapid warming of the atmosphere, which in turn has led to the sorts of distressing extreme weather events that we're seeing right now on the television over in America. Perhaps some might say being environmentally friendly is about plastics, a hugely popular, if that's not an incorrect word to use, topic, and removing single-use plastics from the environment. Incredibly, it's bad enough hearing 11 years of age and it's a VHS recorder, but realizing it's 8 years since the release of the Ruth 2 series. And yet the effects of that still come through, and we're seeing, wonderful things that, like, hopefully to come, the Global Treaty on Plastics. But certainly plastics continues to be the most popular topic, I would say, in this area. A small number of people might talk about caring for nature, and being environmentally friendly is about planting trees and taking care of bees, etc. And in the UK, at least, hardly anyone would say it's about saving water. But all of those topics are equally important and all form the basis of what it truly means to be environmentally friendly. We need all of them, because ultimately we can't live on this incredible earth without these unique and extraordinary life-giving conditions. I'm not going to dwell too long on that. Don't worry, this is not 30 minutes on what climate change is, but it is important to just highlight these key things. And there are literally thousands of facts and data points out there, but maybe the most important ones leading into what I want to talk about for the rest of the evening is that many of you will be aware that last year we breached the one figure that in 2015 scientists said we really should not exceed, which is the global warming of our planet to 1.5 degrees. But maintaining relatively safe and livable conditions on Earth depend on us committing politically to maintain a global temperature that doesn't exceed 1.5 degrees and definitely doesn't exceed 2. But as you'll see on the next point, here we are for the first time, the boundary's been breached, and actually estimates say that based on current policies in place globally, we're more likely to hit around 2.9 degrees by the end of this century. And some scientists consider even this to be too conservative an estimate. And although that timeline might seem a long way off, that's within my son's lifetime. And the belief of most climate scientists is, unfortunately, that is not a survivable figure. So this could not be more important. Last year, international conservation charities told us wildlife populations continue to be in decline, with the number now standing at 73%. When I started, it was in the 60s, 60%, I should say. Indeed, scarcely any part of the world is wild now. Around 96% of animals are actually humans or livestock. Grasslands, I want to shine a light on, hardly ever get a mention, but they're a rich and resilient carbon store and home to a diverse and crucial ecosystem. And in the UK, at least, we've destroyed our rich grasslands to the tune of 97% since 1930. And some of you may be surprised to hear that by 2030, much of the UK will be experiencing severe water stress too. And finally, that eternally popular topic of plastics. We're now so consumed by plastics, there isn't a mountaintop, a depth of the ocean, or even if you were to cut open an animal or a human body that doesn't contain plastic. And those plastics contain around 16,000 toxic chemicals. So these are really important things to know and understand. And it's not a pretty picture. So being environmentally friendly isn't a quaint concept. It's a recognition that we're not in a good place and we want to be in a much better place for ourselves, for our children, for our animals, and to feel motivated by that. And I say our animals because striving for a healthy environment benefits our horses. We, of course, know that horses are mammal, it's part of the ecosystem. Indeed, so are we, although we seem to try to separate ourselves. And we've created the impression that loving our horses, or a good life for horses, is about spending huge amounts of money on buying stuff for them. But of course, what the horse really wants is clean water, fresh air, healthy, nutritious grass, and of course, companionship and the other important aspects that World Horse Welfare advocate for. So when considering being environmentally friendly or unenvironmentally friendly, we can, of course, look at that through the lens of our horses rather than ourselves. So looking to the left-hand side of the screen, the effects of a damaged climate are water shortages, poor quality soil and grasslands, which may be about poached or indeed simply a muddy quagmire that we endured last year as part of the wettest 18 months on record in the UK. That leads to extended periods of stabling and potentially issues with hoof health. It can also mean infectious diseases. As our country warms up, we know that we're creating a far more hospitable environment for vectors that carry diseases like African horse sickness and West Nile virus. And actually, even just thinking about the extreme temperatures that impact the ability and safety of horses to travel to competitions, or respiratory issues. We have a very esteemed equine vet on the call, and I'm sure that he can talk about that in far more detail. But fundamentally, a broken ecosystem through the eyes of a horse is a really, really, really bad thing. Of course, the flip side, a healthy ecosystem means shelter, shade, varied diet, quality grazing, all those great things. And the list actually really does go on, and it's very much in the here and now. Two images that I've borrowed and hopefully correctly credited from the internet. To the left, many of you will have seen the videos and images of horses being rescued from the Los Angeles wildfires. To the right, maybe less thought of, the flooding in the UK and horses being evacuated from stables. I'm sat here in Gloucestershire and we've endured terrible flooding and have seen horses having to be evacuated neck high just down the road from me. So from the horse's perspective, being environmentally friendly is stopping all of this and really thinking about the fundamentals that a horse needs. So I think it's important to state that there really is no good horse welfare on an unhealthy, unsafe and unstable planet. And there are actions that we can take which are directly about welfare for the horse. So making sure they have companionship, which don't really relate to the environment. And there are actions we can take which have very little to do with welfare. For example, thinking about the clothes we wear. But in the middle, there is a very large common ground where the actions we take to help the planet directly benefit the horse and vice versa. So that being said, what does good actually look like? Let's have a look at each environmental condition in turn and just think about what we can do differently. So if we start off with emissions and climate change, there are a few things we can do to reduce our impact on the environment. As most of you, if not all of you on the call will know, that emissions are generated through the burning of fossil fuels, predominantly, or at least human-induced emissions are. So in the equestrian environment, that breaks down primarily into these key areas you have on the screen. Electricity, which we generally use for lighting or power sockets in our stable yards, potentially heating also through the burning of gas or oil. Our vehicles is a very tricky situation for us, but for the most part, they are diesel with some petrol. Diesel, again, used for our machinery like tractors, for those of you with larger locations. Manure even, and linked to that, any interventions we're putting on the ground, whether it's the manure itself or having to put something artificial. And then the emissions that are created through the things we buy, and this often confuses people a little bit. We talk about the supply chain. In other words, the stuff we need, our feed, our bedding, our tack, all of that stuff produces emissions through the life cycle of their creation, the way the product is grown or manufactured, and of course the way it's transported to us. And all of these things and a few more represent yours and your horse's impact on the emissions challenges that we're all trying to address. And it's worth saying that maybe one of the arguments I hear most often is, I'm just one little person with one little yard, what can I really do? I can't make a difference. But we as a sport are nearly 3 million riders, 850,000 horses, hundreds of thousands of acres of land, and together as a community, our actions can have a big difference. So how do we play our part? Well, I was always taught that you can't change what you don't know. Carbon footprinting can be very confusing, and how on earth would you know what your impact is? And equally, what gets measured gets done. So last year, in collaboration with Hartpury University, Sparshot College Group, Derby College Group, and the Farm Carbon Toolkit, we created a completely free to use equine carbon calculator so that anyone can understand their carbon footprint. All of us in that working group firmly believe that money should be no barrier to sustainability. And we also know that particularly in riding schools, livery yards, the cost of living and the financial sustainability of the business is probably the most challenging part. So that's why we gifted this to the sector. There's no upsells or catches or sponsorships or anything. It's just a tool. And it's based in agriculture. Farm Carbon Toolkit have been one of the very top providers of carbon literacy to the farming sector for over 12 years now. And we've adapted it almost entirely for the horse world. I say almost because we did leave agricultural content in there because we recognise a lot of horse owners are also farmers. So we wanted everyone to get as much out of it as they could. But ultimately, if all you want to do is check to see what impact your mileage has, you can just do that. So very, very quickly, this isn't a session about the carbon calculator, but a lot of people ask, what do I do? On the screen is the link, and I think maybe Basil might be popping it into the comments as well. So you just go to the homepage of equinecarboncalculator.org.uk, where you've got an instructional video, FAQs, all the usual. And you start by registering, which is completely free, obviously all GDPR protections and all the things you'd expect. And there's also a sheet on there you can download if you want, which tells you the type of data that you might need. If you're anything like me, you've studiously put around 50,000 pieces of paper away over the last 40 years, just in case you might need them. So it's sort of useful to know, sifting through that, what might be needed. And then you select a dashboard and add a new report. We have that because some people, lucky people out there, have multiple yards and they want separate reports. You enter the information that makes most sense to you about the yard, and you'll see just on this screen a little thing there that says report options. And in the grey box, it's probably a bit teeny weeny, but it says standard scenario planning and testing. I just wanted to explain why that's really useful, because this is about whether you want to just produce a carbon footprint, or if you want to plan for your yard to do scenario testing, or maybe most interestingly, the testing element lets you fiddle around. So this is quite cool, because if you're trying to make decisions about how to improve the or lower the emissions on your yard, you can enter different values and see what impact that makes. So it's almost a means of planning with proper data before you take the action, so you can make sensible choices. Once you've done all of that, you start to enter your data. You can see on the screen here, all of the tabs just shine a light on the different things that go on within your specific location that create emissions. And underneath each of those, so fuels, materials, infrastructure, etc., there are a whole smorgasbord of topics. Don't be overwhelmed by the volume of them. Just pick the ones that are relevant to you, and forget the rest. And then at the end, ping, you get a report all in lifetime. So even if you just put one thing in, it'll take you to the report and tell you that one thing. And it splits everything out so you can see where your hotspots are. But I also wanted to draw your attention to this bar chart on the left, which says emissions offset and carbon balance. It was really important to us not just to focus on emissions, but also what you have on your land, so that you can estimate the carbon storage or sequestration within your property. And again, you can play around with those. So you can see, well, what difference would it make if I plant hedgerows? What difference would it make if I plant woodland? So what does good look like? Once you've got all that data, you know what your hotspots are, what do you do about it? Well, ultimately, the goal is to save money, move away from fossil fuels, and become more self-sufficient and resilient in your business. Things are just going to become more and more volatile cost-wise. So what you want to do is figure out, how do I make my operation really streamlined and self-sufficient? And these are just some of the basics. So only using the electricity you need sounds really obvious, but I was at a yard, I won't say where it was, but it had won awards for being the most sustainable location in the world. That is its accolade. And they very proudly took me to the equestrian part of where I was, and there were no horses in there, no people, and all the lights were on. It seems like a really silly thing, but if you imagine that's happening every single day, 365 days a year, A, you're spending money you don't need, and B, you're releasing emissions that you don't want to do. So basics, switch off, or even just enhance the natural light in your stable space so that you don't need lighting at all. If you do need lighting, make sure it's LED lighting, and think about other efficient equipment. Think about renewable energy sources. Lots and lots and lots of equestrians are switching to wind turbines or solar, which is great because then you maintain more control over your energy. If you can, if it's affordable and feasible, think about electric vehicles or low carbon transport options. And buying from local suppliers, I would say British, but I know that we might have international people on the call, so local. And repair, reuse, recycle. The best way of reducing emissions is to use stuff that we already have and not go through the manufacturing process. What wasn't on that list is the carbon impacts of land, because this is an area I believe actually we have a huge potential that goes beyond just emissions. Our grasslands are such an important part of the national ecosystem and our horses' health that if we take care of them, we can do a truly wonderful thing for the environment. But this is slightly harder to cram into 5 minutes of a 30-minute talk, because there are so many different factors that affect what you could and should do. The type of soil, your geographic location, how you're meteorologically impacted, what's happening in your neighbour's field, the size of your paddock compared to the number of horses you want to graze on them, the individual nutritional health needs and concerns of your horse. I mean, the list really does go on. So there's no one size fits all approach. But I think there are some fundamental questions and principles you could ask yourselves, and these are they. So first and foremost, we have to prioritize the soil. Everything starts with the soil. So getting to know your specific soil type and doing some really basic research, which is readily available on the internet, to understand what that means for you and what you can grow well there, is the start of it all. And then, of course, we have to turn to the horse after that. So what are the specific needs of your horses? Are there any health concerns you want to factor in before you make any changes to your land management? Talk to your vet about whether it's appropriate to switch to things like fecal egg counts rather than constantly using dewormers, which not only impact our horses, but very much impact our environment. If you've got concerns over gut health, that sort of thing, that might lead you to consider certain types of herbal lay or be fearful of certain types of herbal lay, just talk to your vet about what would be suitable for your horse. Generally speaking, a varied diet is best for the horse, but I'm not an equine vet, and clearly your specific horse you need to receive proper consultation with. And then step back and take a look at the land available to you and see what can be added. So much of the time, if we look at the landscape in the UK, you just see a green square with a wooden fence around it, and that's it. And then maybe another one next to it, and another one behind, and another one. We can do so much better than that. So get creative. What can be grown in the space? Can I put hedges? There's lots of funding out there for people to pay to put the hedge in for you. Can I intersperse trees into that? Think about your challenges of turnout. Do you have enough of grassland or paddock space for you to be able to rest it? If not, if you're really restricted by space, can you consider a track system? Something that I think and hope Jenny is going to speak about a little bit later. What type of grass do you have? Can you diversify it? Is that possible? Just moving away from this monoculture with muddy, boggy bits everywhere and a fence. We want to get away from that towards a rich, beautiful, inviting space. Of course, the ever-present problem of manure. Are you paying for it to be taken away? Are you storing it, harrowing it back into that ground? What are you doing with it? Can you use those nutrients? We want to follow nature's example as much as possible rather than putting chemicals into the land. And finally, what else can I do? Can I grow pollinator plants around the fringes of my buildings? Can I put bird boxes in or make holes in my gates for hedgehogs? All those things that people think are terribly twee. Like I said at the beginning, we know the answers. We just need to do them. Around water use, we really must start thinking now and plan for the water shortages that do lie ahead. And we're going to hear a lot about that in the news this year. First and foremost, we've got to start valuing water more. It's going to be a lot more expensive quite soon, so that will maybe naturally happen. But the basics of just not allowing buckets to overflow, fixing leaks, etc., it should be normal for us all. And then the extension of that is, how do we use the natural resources that we have? So rainwater harvesting, to me, feels like an absolute must across the next 5 years for equestrians. Yes, there is a bit of an investment involved, but I really believe that it will provide us with the much needed water for our horses and our sport. Water can be used to wash the horses, clean tap, water plants. Some do use it as drinking water, but I definitely can't and shouldn't recommend that. But most other things, it's perfectly safe for. And simple technologies like water limiters on your hoses, or things that you can put in the buckets so that if someone does leave the tap on, it will automatically cut. And finally, thinking about what we buy and how we use it. So what are the key areas to think about? I would say on the screen, you've got bedding, feed, equestrian surfaces, tack and general paraphernalia. And I've added supplement tubs on the end there because people often mention that, but it's maybe a little bit of a red herring. So the question I get asked most is, what is the most sustainable bedding type? And I think honesty is the best policy. I don't know. There's no data out there to genuinely say, is miscanthus better than the cardboard bedding? Is it better to use the shredded paper from your office? Or there's no proper comparable data to answer that. So what I would say is it's important to apply key principles, which I'm going to go through in just a sec. But there is a lot more data and a lot more information around equestrian services. So just to settle on that for a moment, because it doesn't get anywhere near as much airtime as the other things, but it's hugely important. It was brought to the fore early last year when the government in the UK changed the rules on being able to use waste carpet in equestrian services because of the high levels of toxicity and risk to the environment. And by the way, to our horses and ourselves of inhaling these highly toxic fibers. It's interesting to note that at the moment that law only relates to waste carpet fibers, but this year they're also considering rolling out across all fibers and waste material because of the dangers of plastic. So what does good look like? Well, good looks like natural. It's fairly obvious. The best possible option is to move away from plastics and any kind of poly surface. There's a new surface that's just been launched in the UK called Novian. I suspect we'll see a lot more of that come about as people realise that essentially allowing ourselves to be the kind of dumping ground for the highly toxic waste from other industries isn't where we want to be. We want to have a really healthy environment for our horses and our riders. Equally, when we look at things like tack and clothing, again, we see this plastic thing crop up, eco credentials of recycled plastic bottles being turned into horse rugs and clothing. A, it's bad for the environment because those can't be recycled. You're ending the chain, so that's bad. B, we don't want those kind of toxic chemicals next to our skin, next to our horse's skin. So we don't want to be doing that. So how do you know what to buy, what choices to make? There's just some really basic general principles on the screen for you. Firstly, before you buy anything, just ask yourself the question, do I have to buy it at all? And if I have to, can I buy it secondhand? That's the most sustainable. But if you do have to buy it, think about how it's made. Say no to recycled plastic fabric, support regenerative and organic farming practices, and buy quality that will last. Things like leather are there for a reason. And I speak as a vegetarian, saying I think leather's a good thing because a good leather saddle can last you 100 years. It's much better than the sort of plastic and synthetic alternatives. Where does it come from? What are the origins? How far has it had to travel? And finally, how is it packaged? And what can I do when I no longer need it? We need to think about reducing the amount of stuff we have, taking care of what we've got, and when we can't use it anymore, do something good with it afterwards. So to close, I'd just like to talk a little bit about what it means to be environmentally friendly in 2025, because the world is moving so fast, it can feel so volatile and overwhelming, that I think it's useful to just take a moment and consider how we mentally approach this issue so that we do act and we do make changes. The first thing is environmental sustainability isn't anymore just about saving the world, for want of a different term, and trying to create a future for our children. It's actually about recognizing that we're already in the early phases of climate change. So, in fact, some people on the call may be in countries that are very much in the throes. But in the UK, at least, we were blessed to only be at the beginning. So we have the advantage of being able to think now and adapt. So as horse owners, that does mean things like rainwater harvesting, get that in, invest in that over the next couple of years, but also having plans in place for the really wet winters that we know are going to be, the UK is going to be stricken with much more frequently in the coming years. How to protect your horses and paddocks in those changing circumstances. So very warm, wet winters, very hot, dry summers. Thinking about, literally planting the trees for the shelter and shade for tomorrow, and embedding resilience into your world in a way that maybe we haven't really thought about quite so much. And actually, this is also where money and sustainability meet. Oftentimes people think sustainability is expensive, but I know people that put their solar panels and rainwater harvesting and paddock management and track row management every year over the last 10 years, a new project. And now, in the here and now, was literally talking to someone on Monday saying, this year my renewables start returning me money. I'm not paying anymore, I'm getting money back. And I always try and think, what will the you in 5 years or your horse in 5 years thank you for doing right now in terms of adapting to these major changes, not least of all the rising prices of things. So what can you do to maybe invest a little bit more now so that you can ride the wave and over the coming years? And one of the reasons why we haven't made great strides in looking after the environment is that people avoid the topic. Even people that are passionate about it avoid the topic, because lots of people are afraid to bring it up, either because they don't understand it, or they're embarrassed they might be laughed at, or maybe because they feel like they're going to be perceived as being negative and having a really serious conversation. But I would say the biggest thing that we need to do, and the biggest chance we have of protecting our world and our horses, is to have the conversation, even if that conversation is talking about the fact you are confused. I think it's important to note that there's an interesting relationship between thinking that sustainability is about changing and doing things in a new way versus the recognition that in some cases it's about doing things the way we used to do them. We often criticize ourselves in equestrianism for being a group of people who are very traditional, maybe slow to change. When we conducted the research a couple of years ago, that's what you said about yourselves, which I found very interesting. You really highlighted that as being an issue. But actually, wouldn't it be a great thing if we celebrate our traditions, our traditional perspective, and draw from the past the things we used to do really well? We used to be amazing stewards of the land. We used to understand the value of our resources. We used to understand how to take care of soil and the value of it. We used to know how to mend things, how to build things, how to create things. And there's sort of been a bit of a step away from all of that in favor of different lifestyle choices. So for the people that never moved away, great, don't change, and maybe help that conversation by sharing that knowledge and information and that enthusiasm for the joy of healthy soil and all of those wonderful things. Most of all, just talk to your friends, explore different ways of doing things. And it's important to remember what this is all about. It's about the love of horses and riding. That's why we all do what we do. It's about that feeling of being in nature with our horse, out hacking, being with another animal. It shouldn't be a negative, depressing topic that people are afraid of. It's about joy and leading a happy life. It shouldn't be overwhelming. The stuff I've talked about today, hopefully some of you are saying, well, that's obvious. It really is obvious. So let's do it. Let's not be overwhelmed. Every paddock in the country should look amazing, should have hedges, should have trees, should have vibrant, healthy soil, should have healthy horses in. So my tips to stay inspired and positive are as follows. Focus on the things you can control. The number of times people say, but what about this? But what about that? But I can't. Don't worry about it. Do the things that you can do. And in time, you may be able to do the other things, or someone else might do the other things. But just take the actions that you can take. And don't think you have to do it all at once. Those people that are now living on beautifully sustainable, healthy, resilient properties did a little bit of something every day for the last 10 years. They're not burnt out, broke, shadows of their former selves. They just took it a bite at a time. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes. There are things that I thought were sustainable that are not. That's okay. It's annoying when you realize you've messed up, but just try it and take a moment to feel really proud of your actions. And I see that every day with people who have nothing to do with sustainability, but they have started this process and they feel so proud and happy of the choices that they're making. Take pleasure from nature. There's a reason why we're equestrians. And part of that reason is we love the natural world. We love having a bond with an animal. That's what nature's all about. And know that your horse thanks you for it. For everything that you do, everything you choose to do from here on in, your horse will thank you for it. I'm sure that you've got lots and lots of questions, but I'm going to finish my part of the talk now so that Jenny can talk about all the incredible things that World Horse Welfare do. They're such a wonderful charity, and so inspired by what they do on their farms. So I'm going to finish up here and hand back over to the rest of the team.
Ruth, thank you. I've known you for 3 years. I don't think you've ever made a mistake. But what I loved about was the fact you're so positive and being inspired, and just the fact that we all can do something. And I think you're absolutely right. You sort of think of all of these things. There's nothing. What can little me do in this big world? But actually, if we all do a little bit, it does add up. And so brilliant. Thank you for that. You talked about where people were coming from. And indeed, we got people from across England, Scotland and Ireland, Sweden and Italy, Uruguay and Canada, at least. But perhaps the most important comes from Dorset. It's not Carol in Dorset, but it's World Horse Welfare Sprout, who I'm not sure is listening in, but they've tuned in. So Carol Butter, I think, thank you so much for bringing Sprout and really actually sort of clearly articulating what Ruth has said, that our equines will be very grateful for the efforts we are and will make. I should have mentioned earlier that our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday the 29th, in 2 weeks' time of January. And we're going to be joined by equine behaviourist and zookeeper, Barbara Dreyer, who's going to be exploring what we mean by the term cooperative care and how we can apply the principles of cooperative care to the care of our horses. And Barbara's going to be joined by fellow equine behaviourist Sam Cooper. So Basil will put a link in so you can sign up for that. But we are very much obviously in the throes of today's webinar on the environment. And I'm just going to share my screen once more, and just to introduce to you our second panelist, which is Jenny Fernando, who has a wealth of experience within the charity sector, and as you can see on the slide, has taken on a lot of different roles. But of course, most important of all, she joined the team at World Horse Welfare in 2019, and boy, what a good job she does, and now such a key member of the team, not least because she chairs our environmental impact working group, and that's where Ruth has been so helpful to us over the past 18 months. Jenny herself has got a lifelong love of horses, although she does come in most Monday mornings and complain to me about her, often her riding, to be fair, not the pony. It's never the pony's fault, it's always Jenny's fault. But Socks is clearly a very well-behaved pony. And I mentioned that the quirky fact that is the same in terms of as a childhood, and I just love this one. But before she came an accountant, rather like Ruth, you could tell that she was going to become an accountant, because she tried to fob her mother off by inventing a spreadsheet which showed that if she combined her best friend Sammy and her pocket money together, that they could share a pony. Unfortunately, Jenny's mum saw right through it, and Jenny then remained ponyless. Luckily, Socks is on the scene now, so that's a distant memory. But so Jenny, you're very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much. How are you doing on this cold evening?
Excellent. And just to clarify that literally the only reason I became an accountant was so that I could afford a pony.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first. Brilliant. Listen, Ruth's given us a fascinating insight there, Jenny. But obviously, we come at it from a charity with 4 centres. Can you explain to us a little bit about the charity's sustainability strategy, but initially in the UK?
Sure. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to launch our strategy last year, and it was with an enormous dollop of help from Ruth and the team at White Griffin. We sort of started this work in 2019, where we just thought that we ought to be looking at environmental things, and we had an interest in it. So we put a team together, and the fact that it's being led by the finance director will probably tell you that we don't have sort of specific environmental expertise in these things. We just put our heads together and tried our best. And it's been quite a journey. We did a lot of sort of learning about things and things that we could possibly do. And I think we had quite grand ideas in the beginning. Perhaps we could put a digester on the farms and turn all of our horse manure into free fuel, and then quickly realised that that was quite complicated and quite expensive and probably out of our reach. So I think the sort of accumulation of all of that work in coming together in a strategy, it was as much about learning what we can't do as what we can do. And it follows a lot of what Ruth said in her talk, actually, about the things that we focus on in our farms. And that includes things like measuring our carbon footprint. So we've been doing that every year since 2019. And we sort of refine it every year so we can get it more accurate and learn more about the things that we're doing. We also have trying to learn more about the natural assets that we have on our farms. The more you think about it, that you realise that actually as equestrians, we're in a really unique position to be sort of custodians of quite large pieces of land. How many people have hobbies or are involved in sports or have a lifestyle that has access to those things? And the understanding that horses actually can be really good for the environment as long as we manage them in a sustainable way. So we want to learn more about what our natural assets at the farms are and how we can get them working as hard as possible for the environment. We're looking at saving water, so making sure that we're being very mindful of that. And also we have done some initiatives such as putting in a system at one of our farms in Norfolk that now we flush the visitor centre toilets with rainwater, and looking for opportunities to make sustainable changes as and when possible. Costs can sometimes be a barrier, so we've tried to build things into our sort of normal maintenance schedules. Now when we replace our lights, we try and put sensors on them so they automatically switch off when people leave the room. Whenever things like a boiler needs replacing in a house, we just stop and think, well, could we do something different here? Could we put a heat source pump in instead of using an oil boiler? Sometimes the answer is no, because the property is actually quite old, and to be able to insulate it in such a way that that would work would be cost prohibitive. But we always kind of try and stop and think now about whether there's things like that we can do. I think as well, just to say about our strategy, I think it's a lot about adaptation as well as mitigation. We ourselves are feeling the effects of climate change. Our very sandy soil at Hall Farm is not helped when we have periods of drought. And there are certain fields down by the river which we're seeing less and less of every year because they spend more and more time underwater. So it's around understanding and getting ahead of being able to manage our horses in a way that's going to work for our land into the future as well. And if you are interested, the strategy is on our website. So please take a look and read the whole thing, because there's a lot more than I'm telling you now that's in there.
Well, as ever, Basil's ahead of the game because he's just put the link in the chat, so you can find it there. It's a sport we play about how quickly we can get Basil to put these things up, often with Becca's help. But thank you to both of them for getting that up. Jenny, you've talked a lot about actually it's something that we all can do, but it's a very big issue, and if it's the little me or a horse owner is just where do you start? Where can we, if you want to start a sustainability plan, what do you do on day one?
If it were me, I would go outside and I'd take a look at the things that I have, the natural assets. If you're on a livery yard, they may not even be your assets. So actually just have a look at what's within your sphere of control. So for example, my horse is on a livery yard, so I can, for starters, make sure that I'm worming responsibly, making sure that we're egg counting rather than just blanket worming. I can think about when things break, do I really need to replace them? Can they be repaired? Can I share a poo picker or a wheelbarrow with somebody else? What about feed bags and tubs and scoops? Can I recycle those for something else? Actually, the food that I buy for my horse, when you buy it online, it actually gives you an option. Do you want to add a scoop or not? So you can actually exclude the scoop, and that's just a little bit of plastic then that you're not taking on. And if you do have your own patch of land to play with, just have a look. Can you leave some of the grass on the borders to grow long in the summer? Can you plant a tree or a hedge in a corner just to give a bit of browsing interest to your horse? Can you clean the windows so that you don't have to turn the lights on as much? Make sure that you don't overfill your buckets, as Ruth very rightly said, that there's lots of little things that you can consider.
Blimey, sorry, that was amazing. And I meant to ask that question to Ruth, and I answered to Jenny. So, Ruth, can you better that? Oh, we might have. I think Ruth might have frozen. Technology down to Gloucestershire is...
She's such a pro. She knows it all. That's right. No. Oh, am I here?
Oh, yeah, no, you're back. You're back now, Ruth. So yeah, go again.
I was just saying, Jenny is such a pro. You don't need me on the call. She knows exactly what she's... You can direct all questions to Jenny.
But in terms of taking, Jenny's given us some really practical guidance there. In terms of trying to sort of establish a yard plan, what would your guidance be people to want to set out a yard plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we go to yards, we literally go back to basics with a clipboard, a pen and paper outside, physically looking at what we've got. If you already know things like your soil type, have a good steer on your topography, great. If not, try and get that foundational information so that when you are thinking about your outside spaces, you're more you can make more informed decisions. But in terms of the rest of the infrastructure, just list out what you have there. Think about, okay, I have roofs. Roofs could help with rainwater, that could help with solar. They could help with cutting windows in to create natural light. Fine. And almost work your way down with your eye visually. Look at the things that you're buying and spending money on. I actually think a really helpful practice is to almost look at it from a financial point of view. So what am I buying? So my electricity bills, my feed bills, my manure collection bills, whatever, and consider how can I save money by doing this in a more environmental way? And that can be changing your suppliers to someone more environmentally friendly. It can be reducing the amount that you actually need. So you're spending less, certainly with electricity bills. When you really think about what you've got, one of the things that I always say to do, go around your property and turn every single switch off, every single one. And when you want electricity, switch it on. Think of electricity the way we, ironically, one of the few things we do that's good with water is we turn the tap on when we want water. With electricity, we keep it running all the time, and then we just take it when we want it. Imagine if we did that with water and you just left it running and put a cup under every time you wanted to sip. That would be lunacy, and yet we do that with electricity. So when you're thinking about planning, either stand visually and survey the space and make a list of everything, and then go back inside and look at what you're spending money on and how you can then change that and pivot it to an environmental perspective, or look at the physicality of the space and consider how that can be adapted, and then start to prioritize based on easy things you can do first that generally don't cost any money, and do those.
Brilliant. I'm sorry, I cut out in the middle there. There must be something with the technology gremlins.
Don't worry, I was hugely relieved, because when you froze, I wasn't sure if it was me or you, and I was talking away. I was trying to look and see if Jenny was blinking to make sure I wasn't just talking into the no man's land.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So Jenny, you gave a very eloquent answer, and I really do mean to ask this to you this time, but around what we're doing in the UK. Obviously, we help horses and horse owners internationally. How do we think about environmental sustainability in our international work?
I think there's two aspects of this. We support communities who use horses, donkeys and mules in their everyday lives to adapt to the effects of climate change. So, for example, there are communities within Senegal who sort of travel seasonally with the grazing, and they're reliant on their equines for transport. And as their rainy season becomes longer, those journeys are becoming longer, and that really affects sort of children's education. So we are using our influence within country to work with the government to find sort of sustainable solutions to year-round nutrition that will be able to withstand climate change much easier. Similarly, we're working in Zimbabwe with our partners to sort of trial more drought-resistant fodder so that we can shore up the supply of feed for working horses there. I think the other side of this, though, and it sort of comes to something that Ruth said earlier around doing things the way that we used to do them. You know, if you speak to my stepdad, he always finds it hilarious when we start talking about environmental sustainability, because he's all, in my day, there wasn't any plastic. We used to get our milk out of glass bottles, and our sandwiches were wrapped in paper and tied with string. And there's something around going back to the way that we used to do things that are perhaps a little less convenient, but probably a lot better for the environment. And a lot of the communities that we work in worldwide are still reliant on horsepower for their transport, which is something that a lot of us on the call today, or probably all of us on the call today, have moved away from for the sake of convenience. And I'm not suggesting that we all go back to sort of ditching our diesel cars and hitching our ponies up to carts. But is there a way of accepting a little bit less convenience in our lives? And I always think of when we introduced that when they banned shopping bags in supermarkets, and how probably for 2 years I used to walk home from the supermarket like this with arms of food because I would forget to take bags. But now we all just do it because that's the way that we've gotten used to doing it. And you think about sort of some of the communities we work with in Nepal, a partner that we have there is working with others to sort of install biomass fuel creators. So something I was talking about, could we put a biomass boiler in at our farm? Well, no, because actually that sounds really scary and complicated and expensive. But they're doing it in Nepal because they have to do it. So I'd like to take some of that learning back into our own work and our work within the UK and Europe, and challenge ourselves a little bit more in terms of what's really possible.
That's a fascinating perspective. There's so much we can learn from others. It's not just us in the UK. Yeah. Sorry, Ruth.
No, I was. It's just going to sort of develop that point a tiny bit further from everything Jenny said there. Almost the same point, but just we are lucky, if I may say that we are at the early stages of the impact of climate change in the UK. As I said, in terms of water, we are not struggling with extreme water shortage yet. Hosepipe bans are not extreme water shortage. What is to come is something more akin to what you see in Portugal, South Africa, that kind of thing. And I do wonder whether, understanding that sadly there are communities that World Horse Welfare work with who are experiencing and are accustomed to the impacts of climate change and how to safely manage horses in those climes. I think in that way too, not just the sort of stewardship of the land and the technologies, but also that adaptation piece from those countries and those horse owners that are already struggling. I think that we should humble ourselves to learn a lot from what's happening around the world.
Yeah. No, it was a really good point. Really good point. Thank you. And thank you for those who are putting questions into the Zoom Q&A. I love it that Basil he's strict and proper for everyone, including if you're Sarah, who used to be a trustee of World Horse Welfare, and she put a question in the chat function, which, as I said at the beginning, is not allowed. You have to do it in the Q&A function. And so Basil politely pointed that out to Sarah, who's very, very politely put it into the Q&A function. So please do put them in there, and remember you can upvote them as well. Ruth, when you think about public health, there's a real challenge because people think if around vaccinations, well, if everyone else is vaccinated, then I don't need to get vaccinated because I'm protected because everyone else. And there's a very similar sort of analogy, read across. I think, well, if everyone else is going to sort of carry on with and make those difficult changes sometimes that Jenny said around environmentalism and environmental sustainability, then I don't need to. So why is it so important that we, whatever role we have, from the individual horse owner to the large organisation, why is it so important that we all are in this together?
Oh gosh, for all the reasons. I mean, if I may say, because it's morally corrupt not to do so. It's morally corrupt to say my neighbour should, but I shan't. I would never ask someone to do something I'm not prepared to do myself. So I suppose that would be my first standpoint. But a slightly less emotional response to your question would be because I think I often hear it said that the greatest threat to this planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And I think we're caught in this mental block that nothing that I do has any impact on anything going on beyond me and my home. And the problem is that, I suppose, like with voting and maybe like with vaccinations, to use your example, that's just not how it works. Every individual has an impact, and the cumulative impact is what provides and produces the result. And I also think that people don't have a full understanding of what that impact might be. I have people say to me, well, I don't travel abroad, so I don't have an impact. And I'll say, but you also shop for clothes every week. And you have these kind of lifestyle choices. And it's not to criticize anyone for the choices they make, but it's to recognize that we all are part of the reason we are where we are, and therefore we all must be part of the solution to get to where we want to be. And it's funny because I actually heard exactly that a couple of years ago. I spoke at a conference, and in that speech, I gave examples of lots of amazing things that people within that particular industry were doing. And someone said afterwards, I'm so pleased to hear what everyone else is doing because now I don't have to. And I mean, it was probably the most disheartening response to a speech I've ever given, but it did give me food for thought that I always think that by sharing and celebrating the stuff that other people do motivates and gives confidence to others to try. And I would like to think that the more we do that, the more we share best practice, the more we show it can be done, the more we'll have those reactions, that there will be fewer and fewer people that say, great, I really don't have to. But I think if the wildfires in LA have taught us anything, is that climate change does not discriminate based on status, wealth, location, or indeed anything at all. And it's devastating and tragic. And I hope it's a reminder to us all that we're all in this together.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ruth. So now we're going to open it up, and we've got some really good questions that have come in, and I'll bat these between our two panelists. And Janice has asked Jenny, what about the use of haylage? Is recycling of the wrapping common? And Claire has also said, likewise, wrapped bedding. So what about wrapping?
I don't know if it's common, but I do know it's possible. I know that there are some initiatives where they'll go to farms and take bulk collection of that wrapping. So if you are based in or near a farming community, then please get Googling and see if you can find something that will work for you.
Brilliant. Excellent. Ruth, a question that's come in from YouTube, and you talked about surfaces, and the question is around surfaces track system. Is there a surface that is more sustainable and has a lower carbon footprint?
Yeah, it's interesting because the natural surface that's come on the market is very much about not using plastics and watering less. It doesn't necessarily focus on carbon footprint. And to my knowledge, none of the surfaces that are out there at the moment, whether they be wax or waste material or whatever, have actually calculated a carbon footprint. So I'd be interested if there are any companies, equestrian services, that have done that. Love to hear from them. I would say, applying some logic to it, plastics are ultimately a fossil fuel. And so there is, of course, a carbon footprint involved, or emissions involved in the use and manufacture of a fossil fuel. So we want to get away from that. One might argue that using a waste product would eliminate part of the carbon footprint of the production of a new material. I'd be really curious to look through the life cycle assessment of how that does compare. That would be a really fascinating piece of work. But it does raise another question, that sometimes those bubbles that I showed at the beginning of water emissions, waste, biodiversity, sometimes they're at odds with one another. So it may be that there is a product, and I'm not talking about equestrian services, this could be any product that is amazing because it's plastic free and it doesn't require water, but it has high emissions. Or it may be that it has low emissions, but in order to do so, it actually had to be made of plastic and it's not recyclable. Like, sometimes you can't tick every single environmental box, and you have to think. Perfectionism, I think, has been the death of environmentalism. You have to think, what's the best possible environmentally friendly option that there is? And sometimes that might mean using something that you don't want to use. Sometimes it might mean, you know, Jenny just referenced talking to your local farmer about bedding. It might be that it's better to use somebody that's local to cut down the mileage, but maybe they don't have such good processes. Or conversely, it's much better to go with a regenerative, you know, miscanthus farmer that's solar powered and, you know, does all these wonderful things, but you've got an extended footprint in the transportation. So the data is really important. I don't know of any comparison of data across equestrian surfaces for carbon footprint, but it's not just about the emissions.
Yeah, that's a really good question to answer. Thank you very, very much for that, Ruth. Steve, Jenny has asked, A brilliant question. They, in Aberdeenshire, have air-escape ponies. They run a track system around their paddocks, planted up the margins of trees, as well as having blocks of native trees wherever they can fit them in. The ponies graze among the trees, and they were very keen on browsing, especially hawthorn, birch, and willow. As a result, they don't use wormers, although we obviously fecal egg count, and the land is alive with dung beetles and birds, etc. Is this something we should be promoting as a really go where you can of keeping equines?
I really hope so. And Ruth and I are working on a project this year actually involving track systems. We do use them at our farms for weight management of horses. So that sort of equine welfare slant, but actually I do think there could be a big environmental slant here as well. But I'm also equally aware that there might be downsides depending on the setup. Actually, if you're funneling horses up and down a track all day, you might be causing soil compaction. So there may be sort of negative aspects as well as positive aspects. But what we'd really like to explore is, if you need to use a track system, is there a way of setting it up that actually has environmental benefits and hopefully benefits for the horses as well? Because introducing things like trees and hedging to create browsing interest could only be a positive.
Brilliant. And just a really simple thing, and Ruth, I don't know if you have a view on this, but obviously, as horse owners, and especially if you've got small paddocks, we're taught to poo pick every day because that's a very good way of managing the worm burden. But obviously, as we now know, dung beetles are so important for the soil. And so actually we've started to poo pick, especially in the winter, maybe every 3 days. And God, it's so exciting. I've never known such excitement in my family when we see dung beetles, which is, that says probably more about my family than anything. But that's a really simple way. It didn't cost anything, but actually, especially in the winter time, actually you can still manage your worm burden, but also develop that dung beetle population too. So it's little ideas like that, isn't it, that I think be so powerful sometimes.
It is, and it's that development of knowledge, isn't it? I mean, the absolute importance of the health of the horse and the reason why we remove the manure is fundamental, but it doesn't have to be so very clinical, so very 100% all the time, nothing goes anywhere near it. This is ultimately an animal, and an animal that needs a healthy soil, healthy grass, and the best way of doing that is through the organic cycle. The organic cycle depends on manure and nutrients from creatures going into the soil and fertilizing in that wonderful, rich, natural way. I completely concur. I was fortunate enough to do some filming on a really great thoroughbred stud, and we were talking about land management, and they were desperate to talk about dung beetles, and so all of a sudden, everyone randomly started scampering around one of the fields, desperately sort of kicking away bits of poo, trying to find beetles in it. And there was just this moment of huge joy and excitement when I just very, very gently, sort of pushed a bit of poo to one side and went, beetle! And, everyone flocked. But actually, it was real. It was genuinely exciting. And that's where I said in my talk, as daft as it sounds, when you do start looking at sustainability, when you do take actions, when you do notice nature, you genuinely, I haven't met a person that doesn't get, maybe there might be the odd grumpy teenager out there somewhere, I don't know, but I haven't met a person that doesn't genuinely get some level of joy when they've hung a bird feeder and the first chaffinch comes, or the first blue tit, and you see it whilst you're at your computer. That's what it's all about. So yeah, seeing a beetle in some poo, why not?
Actually, I love it. I love your passion. And Janet has asked, should we be removing dung from pasture? Well, in general, yes. If you've got a small pasture, you do need to be, but you don't necessarily need to be doing it daily. If you're fecal egg work counting, you can sort of balance that and titrate that. So obviously, horses out of the wild, no one moves their pasture, their dung, but it's, generally in times of a way we're keeping our horses, it is still a really important way of managing worm burdens. But I'm not here as a panelist. I'm here to ask the questions. And Jenny, someone's asked from YouTube, how can we manage winter turnout during increasingly wet winters to meet the standards, the needs of the horses and the needs of the land?
Okay, just a point on the wormer, actually, we have a whole separate webinar on sustainable worming, don't we, which is really, really interesting, that involved Westgate Labs. So there's lots of good information there about poo picking and not poo picking. And
well, hang on a minute, I'm not a panelist, and you're not. So I should be telling that, but you're absolutely right. And I know Basil will very quickly find that for us. Sorry, Jenny.
Okay, so winter turnout, I think it's really important to try and avoid soil compaction wherever we can. And obviously you need to understand what kind of soil you've got. Some of it's going to be easier to manage than others. There's certain sort of pinch points in sort of gateways that get particularly poached. So thinking about things you can do there, whether that's sort of putting a bit of hardcore down or stones to stop that, or some other sort of matting. We had an interesting conversation at one of our farms just before Christmas, because we've started to use some mud mats to avoid that problem, which is better for the horses, but they're made of plastic. So we're sort of umming and ahhing about, is this the way forward, or could we find a better product than this? But as Ruth says, it's a balance, and it's always a balance between what's good for your horse and what's good for the environment. So you sort of do what you need to do. Some other things that you could think about potentially are, I know at my yard, sometimes where horses are kept sort of in single paddocks, there can be an issue with fence walking, and you get those kind of grooves and those tracks on the fence line. Well, can you make sure that your horse has got company to actually avoid that kind of fence walking behaviour? You can also do sort of things like green mulching, which is like using old hay, which kind of spreads and creates a surface. That's not going to work for everybody. If you're on really thick clay and mud, that's probably not going to work for you. But just trying some of those things that might help.
And the only other thing I would want, I mean, that's an amazing summary Jenny's given, and there's only one more I would add, which is planting. I'm a huge advocate for nature-based solutions. Jenny's absolutely right. Sometimes plastic's the answer, plastic's the answer. And by the way, there are some products out there, I don't actually know the name, so I can't give them a heads up, but there are some products out there that use really good recycled plastic that maintain the integrity so it doesn't leach into the environment. I did remember speaking to someone about it. So there are some options out there. But nature-based solutions, so planting is a great way of maintaining that soil health, which helps with everything Jenny was just talking about in terms of that compaction and soil erosion and that loss of topsoil that we so want to avoid for all the reasons. So just think about, how does nature look after itself, and try and mimic it. If you've got the space and you can put some hedging in, some plants, some trees, some anything, just to try and strengthen up that environment, that's also a good option.
Actually, can I just jump back in, sorry, Ruth, because that's a really good point, and it reminded me of something else, which is when you said planting, we're looking at sort of using hedging to plant on steep slopes, because we get a lot of water runoff down the hill, especially in winter. So again, if you're on a hill, then consider using something like that sort of across the landscape down the hill. Will help to slow that run of water and keep the soil together.
Brilliant. In fact, I'm just reading some of the chat coming in on Zoom, and Eileen, who's our centre manager up in Aberdeenshire, is giving some really interesting of how we used to use haylage and now we've moved to hay. And Sarah, she's not asking a question, so Basil won't tell her off, but she's talked about sheepfall, a cheap, natural, and farmers glad to get rid of it, useful for muddy gateways. Well, they I've never heard of that before, but there you go. So, Ruth, question on YouTube. How can we tell at a yard and an industry level that strategies that we are implementing for the environment are working?
How can we tell that they're working?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, what a cracker. Well, you've got the data-led approach. So if you were to use carbon calculations, so using the carbon calculator, quite literally you will just see the numbers drop. So as you enter the data in year on year, you will see that your carbon footprint has decreased. So that's a really nice, easy one. In terms of the nature-based options, I would take my lead from, the world leading organizations that we have in this country, like, Woodland Trust, WWF, the various regional wildlife trusts. They know their eggs, and they do the most basic of things in some cases, which is literally observing the environment. Do you notice more and more varieties of birds? Do you notice more and more varieties of butterflies? Do you notice bees? If you have a little bit of knowledge, and to be perfectly frank, you could even just Google this to enhance your knowledge a little bit more. If you were to take a spade out into your paddock or at certain points around your paddock and just take a look at your soil, what does it look like when you feel it? Is it compacted? Are there lots of worms in there? How is that shifting and changing? If you do that through the seasons or year on year and take notice of it, take photographs or make a narrative comment somewhere about what you noticed and see those improvements. Those are ways that nature's telling you that it's happier. There are, of course, usually technological ways if you are that way inclined to do it. AI is, of course, one of the ways in which some people are looking to understand A, how to fix things, and B, if it's fixed. And of course, you can get specialists, agronomists, etc., all coming to your land and ecologists and telling you. But under the assumption most people on the call are not in a position to necessarily spend lots of money on AI and professionals, just keeping a log and noticing the soil, the nature, the flow of water, as Jenny was talking about on the hill, like noticing how water is pooling, that kind of thing, is another way that you could do it.
Brilliant. Thank you. We're almost out of time, but David Pritchard, a great friend of the charity, he's just pointed out, and obviously we use plastic. We need to decrease our reliance on plastic, but it's not all necessarily always bad. And he was saying actually from the 16,000 plastics that there are, not all are. There's a level of toxicity, the different levels of toxicity there. So I thought that was a really interesting. Thanks for that, David.
It is, and also on that, I want to sort of give a little bit of a shout out to the poor supplement companies who are really going to have a tough old time ahead, because we have to maintain the safety of our horses and a clean sport, of course, in accordance with beta and NOx guidelines and other such critical regulations. And there is a reason why plastic exists. It does do a really good job for the things we want it to do. It's horrible for the environment, but it's the perfect solution. That's why it exists. And it might be that for quite some considerable time, that is what we live with. But I think, again, this comes back to this perfectionist thing, trying to unilaterally say, get rid of all plastics, we have to, it's all gone, do it tomorrow. It's just not feasible. Yeah. And in some cases, not even appropriate. And I agree with the gentleman that sometimes they serve a purpose and we have to tolerate them.
Yeah. And one of our great sayings is, don't let excellence be the enemy of the good. And that fits it so well, doesn't it? Two more questions, really quick answers, if I may. Jenny, Emma's asked, which is the most sustainable method of providing dust-free forage? Is it haylage? Is it wrapped in plastic, sauté with the water usage and effluent production, or steaming using electricity?
I don't know. I think, as Ruth kind of said earlier, it's down to an awful lot of factors there, like where it's coming from, how far it's travelled, etc.
Ruth, anything to add on that?
Only that, although there is a sprinkling of information out there, to my knowledge, some really sound science-led research has not provided the answer. I would be, if someone would like to fund it, I'd be more than willing to work with World Horse Welfare to do that research, to find the most sustainable way of feeding and bedding your horse. But without proper data, I wouldn't want to offer up an answer. I think one would just have to take a common sense approach.
Yeah, and I think that, where we don't have these answers, you do just have to take a common sense approach and how it's best to do. Brilliant. And then Ruth, Sarah's asked, are there any artificial surfaces for arenas, trackways, etc., that don't have a polluting runoff?
I mean, I think anything that involves waste and plastics would just be bad. The wax-based, more expensive options are going to be better. And obviously also the location where you have them, the way that you manage the watering of that surface, and how you catch water in the surrounding area, that will all help in terms of a management. There's an amazing company called equestrianism, I think, who do a few different things around irrigation and putting in arena surfaces. And they've said that, ultimately natural is best. But if you're not going to go down the natural route and you want to go down the artificial route, then I think probably next best would be like a waxy surface with a really good management system to contain any contaminants getting into the environment.
Wonderful. Well, listen, thank you to you both. That has been absolutely brilliant. And thank you to Basil and Becca. Your response and getting those links up in the chat was the fastest you've ever been, which is that you're absolutely on fire. Do remember that on the 29th of January, 2 weeks' time, we've got a next webinar with equine behaviourist and zookeeper Barbara Dreyer, and we'll be joined by Sam Cooper, and that's looking at cooperative care and how we can introduce that into the care systems for our horses. I just want to say a thank you to all the questions, and then just finally to come to Ruth and Jenny and say, listen, we've heard a lot tonight or during this discussion. What would be your key? If I come to Jenny, I'll come to you first. What's your key take-home message?
That I think nobody has all of the answers and there's no perfect solution. So for me, it's just about being mindful and looking for the opportunities in everything you do to do them a bit more sustainably.
Thank you. And Ruth?
It would be just do something. Don't wait. Even if it's something small, anything. Plant a bulb. Don't care. Anything. Just make that first step to factor nature and the environment into your life.
Brilliant. And it's a journey. There ain't no destination here. This is a journey. There's milestones along the way. And I tell you what, to help us along that journey, you two have been absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much to you, Ruth, and to Jenny, and Ruth especially to you for working with Jenny and with us and in helping develop our environmental sustainability plan, which is really exciting. And we're looking at introducing a track system in our farm in Lancashire, and we'll come back another time and talk about how we've managed to do that in an environmentally sustainable way. So thank you. See you in a fortnight, and thanks very much. Do remember, all of our webinars are on our YouTube education channel. Thank you very much, and see you next time.